Rich Nelson, and he is the chief strategist for Allendale Incorporated. And we're going to talk a little bit about Allendale's survey results for the 2019 Acreage survey. Rich, all right, let's look at some of the numbers here. For corn, you have 91.4 million acres that farmers are projected to plant this year based on your survey. And then for soybeans, you have 84.2 million acres for soybeans as well. So what we're seeing here is that corn seems to be king on what farmers will potentially plant this year. Does that surprise you at all?
No, not too much. I think in general, the trade has been talking about this issue with lower soybean acres and in general, some trade concerns, large supplies, and some concerns about pricing in the past few weeks. So I do think this reflects that. Perhaps one of the things we can suggest that maybe our survey suggested versus USDA's February ag farm numbers is perhaps this 2.3 million acres and increase into corn relatively expected. What surprises us was the 4.9 million acre decrease in soybeans. So in other words, a larger than expected pushback on the soybean side here.
When you look at the total acreage there, like you mentioned, you have 91.4 million acres for corn that's expected to be planted. For soybeans, 84.2 million acres. Now for corn, that's down from USDA's ag form. For soybeans, that's also down from USDA's ag form. So where are those extra acres? Are farmers not planting as much?
You know, bottom line, that appears to be the case right now. Our top three crops, corn, soybeans, wheat combined, that comes out to about 223.2 million acres. And that's actually a decline of almost 3 million acres. So USDA suggested about a 2 million acre drop at their ag farm numbers for the top three crops. Our survey here suggests almost a 3 million acre drop. Looks like a simple pushback in general for all acres in regards with this low price environment we have right now.
To lead up with another question, did farmers highlight why there'd be a drop in acres, or did they highlight what they're going to do with those acres?
You know, of course, our core central corn belt farmers not changing acres at all. This is going to be pretty much the North Dakota, western South Dakota, and the Western Plains are the ones who are going to make these type of decisions. A lot of these people have maybe mentioned going to sorghum if they can, or some other crops if they can as well, simply to get away from the soybean discussion point.
When we look at the soybean acres right now, did farmers highlight in the survey why there's a little bit of a drop potentially with soybean acres? Did they highlight if it's due to price? Did they highlight whether that's due to trade?
No, actually, they didn't get too much in depth. A lot of guys traditionally would tell us, I'm going to stay with my standard rotation, which might include maybe a little more corn, maybe a little more soybeans, depending on the year. In this case, we didn't pick up any overt message from the producers. They basically told us through the numbers that overall, there was a general pushback. In terms of the core areas where we're seeing these numbers, actually surprising. We did see a little drop for Illinois, a little more so for Indiana than expected. One thing of note, really for the state of Iowa, the top corn and soybean producer, most people staying with a standard rotation in that location at least.
Is there anything with this survey that surprised you this year?
You know, for the most part, we'd have a large amount of participation. In fact, a record amount, over 200 new participants over last year's numbers. So a lot of participation, number one. Number two, regarding the numbers themselves, I would say the simple message as far as a general mild pushback on the total acreage mix. As I mentioned, almost 3 million acres decline from last year's plantings.
I want to talk about weather a little bit. As you know, corn is king in your survey. Soybean acres are down, of course, since corn is king. Right now, the Midwest is having some pretty bad weather, and a lot of people know that soybeans, generally there's a larger planting window for soybeans, especially if guys can't get in to plant at a timely manner. Do you think that soybean number could potentially fluctuate, or does the weather not seem to be that big of an issue?
It really could. And I'm actually going to take this question and first discuss spring wheat. One thing our survey did mention is this spring wheat planting discussion is going to be very important. Our producers had implied a larger spring wheat push than we expected to see. And certainly as we have up until April 14th, I believe, is when we'll have a traditional 13% planted. So actually this whole acreage discussion starts with spring wheat. Regarding the corn soybean mix, we have some big questions there, like you mentioned. In other years with a soil moisture profile like this, we have a 4 to 10 million acre preventive plant. So that's a big question. On the other hand, though, if producers want to get this crop planted in this moist environment, and that's the key question, if they want to get it planted, they can do it like they did in 2008. But right now, it looks like more of this 2009 to 2011 similar year pushback here.
Let's look at some of the production numbers here, and especially some of the supply. When we look at soybeans, for example, you have here, given the higher beginning stocks, total supply of 5.1 billion would be a new record when it comes to soybeans. Do you think this just shows that supply is just going to keep snowballing and it's going to keep potentially being a problem?
I think our issue with supply is really going to be a last year as well as this year issue for 2009 as well. In the coming years, I do have some questions about how many acres we will be pushing into these crops, especially as right now on the wheat side, for instance, it appears the question is how many acres can we drop out of wheat, specifically winter wheat. So I think on the acreage discussion in the coming years, perhaps we'll moderate numbers. Certainly for this year, we simply can't change supply that quickly. It's more or less like turning a cruise ship, so to speak.
And then too, when we look at wheat, you have here, it's the second smallest all wheat acreage number since the start of USDA's current all wheat planting data series going back to 1919, if this is realized. Does that surprise you?
Really not too much. I think we got to point out in the past just 5 to 10 years, we've already taken out about 8 million acres out of the winter wheat discussion, and that's basically been replaced by the people in Eastern Europe, Russia, for instance, and many other areas. So really on the wheat discussion specifically, looks like we're trying to scale back production and scale back acreage as many of the other producers step in and try to continue to pound out new production there.
Rich, I know we could talk all day, but is there anything I missed that I did not ask you with your survey results that you want to touch base on for our viewers?
One other thing, which also is important for us in both the long-term and short-term, is farmer marketing patterns. We do ask these producers how much old crop of corn, soybeans, and wheat have been sold, and as well as new crop marketings. One thing which is quite interesting is maybe they're just a little bit lower than last year in terms of active sales for corn. For soybeans, though, last year during the survey, they had 85% of old crop soybeans sold by now. This year, about 72%. So a lower marketing pattern, certainly for the soybean side, and also showing up on the wheat numbers as well.
I don't know if I have anything else. So thank you, Rich. I really appreciate the time. And as all of you are watching, we will keep you posted. We'll have more on Ag Day tomorrow morning and more on our social media platforms as the day goes on.